this room feel that they understand clearly what community television is, just before I make my comments? And how many in the room have either volunteered or been involved in producing a community television show in the past? Okay, so the Broadcasting Act defines 3 sectors in the Canadian system: public, private, and community. And Patricia has asked us to talk today about media interventions we've made and what we've learned. So I'm not going to talk a lot specifically about the community media issue, but just enough to give you a context. There are 3 posters I put out on the wall there if you're curious about some of the key facts and figures about community television in Canada. And I've been playing little videos here in the room about the history. You may see in breaks over the next 2 days too. And I'm also talking in the local media session tomorrow specifically more about that issue and our vision for what should happen. So I'll restrict the rest of my comments to sort of what I've learned of becoming a media activist and what seems to be working so far. So the Canadian Association of Community Television Users and Stations, or CACTUS for short, it was a name made by Michael Lithgow, and he made the website, so that's really Michael Lithgow founded it, and I jumped on board. Was sort of put together around the time of the diversity hearings in Ottawa. There had been a lot of people concerned about the community television sector in the broadcasting system for at least 10 years. I'll tell you what happened 10 years ago in a second. But those people were all separated across the country. We're all volunteers. We didn't really have anyone, first of all, in Ottawa that could easily meet with MPs or meet with the regulator to have that sort of direct impact that you need. And secondly, and this sounds really basic in our country, but believe it or not, there was almost no one in Quebec that was working in the area that spoke English, and almost no one working in the rest of Canada that spoke French. There just wasn't good communication among the different parts of the country so that we could organize. And just a number of factors came together around the time of the diversity hearings. I happened to come back and live in Ottawa. I happened to be bilingual, and so suddenly we started to have communication across the country. So those were a couple of barriers, very basic barriers we had to overcome at the beginning. So what happened 10 years ago, I used to work for Shaw's community channel in Calgary as a volunteer coordinator. It was my first job in the professional industry. I say professional as in I was employed, helping the public learn to make their own television productions. And in 1997, it was 2 CRTC reviews ago of the community television sector, it was partially deregulated. It became optional for cable companies to offer the public a channel on which they could volunteer. And within about a month of that decision, Shaw asked us as staff to write a letter to all of our 400 or so volunteers in the Calgary area and tell them we didn't need them anymore. They were going to go to a different programming format. So, the beginning of where you start as an activist, I think, is with moments like that. I'd seen the power of that model and what it did in communities, and about half of us within a month quit for different reasons. I think a lot of us were scared because Shaw was a big employer, already owned some other channels. What that was going to mean if we made an official stand against it. We sort of drifted away to other jobs without a big stand, and about half the staff in Victoria quit for the same reason shortly after. And then a lot of us didn't really know what to do, and we weren't really that informed on CRTC regulations anyway in terms of what the public's rights were. And so over a couple of years, a lot of us were just kind of bummed and depressed and didn't know what to do. And but we started reading CRTC regulations. So the first thing is you've got to inform yourself about the policy framework that you're working within. And then I think by 2002 they reviewed the policy again. I was again worried about my status in the industry. What if I came out against this big owner? Would I never work again? Since at the beginning of my career. So I had 70 volunteers in Calgary sign a petition mad about the fact they'd had their programs taken away, and I sent it in under my parents' name, because I didn't know what it meant. So I think that the first thing you've got to do is figure out what you're willing to do and who you are, and make sure that you can stand up and take whatever the ramifications are going to be of your intervention against big, powerful companies. So that was and that's been a gradual thing. So after 2002, I guess my next thing is that you need to use the tools that you have. So as a television producer, I sort of vaguely felt, I don't really understand what's the potential of community TV and who else is doing it in other places. And so I got a small grant from a fund that no longer exists, because thanks to the Conservatives, and started to travel around the world collecting making a documentary series about community television in other countries. And I think at that point I only had sort of a vague idea that maybe I would bring these models back and shame the Canadian government into, look what everyone else is doing, we could be doing that too, we invented this. But without a really clear idea. I was about 30 years old. And when I came back, I then began to develop a relationship with the regulator, which has helped. So I interviewed the regulator, some members of the CRTC, about the policy. It got me on their radar, and shortly afterwards they commissioned me to write a report about my findings in other countries. So I kind of existed now as somebody that had some credibility. And meanwhile, we were getting the sector together. We began intervening at the diversity hearings initially. Michael was there too. And then in every subsequent hearing that dealt with local programming or issues that impacted on community media, we started to intervene so that people knew at least who we were and that we were part of these broader issues that were taking place around media concentration and problems in local media. Michael built a website, which was hugely important, so that people interested had somewhere they could check in on news. So we didn't have an office, we didn't have a budget, but hey, in cyberspace there was this website that people could go to. Building partnerships with other groups has been really critical. So for example, in the hearings that we've just gone through, the deadline for written intervention was February 1st, and we had sort of made a target to ourselves. We need to get 2,000 Canadians writing in for this to have credibility that people are upset. How are we going to get those 2,000 Canadians? It turned out that there was key partnerships with other groups that are here over the next couple of days who put on their websites, which were much more trafficked and seen than our websites, that this was also an issue for them. Posted, sample things that people could talk about in their letters, and so through the internet, because we didn't actually have access to cable community channels, they were owned by big corporations that we were fighting, we were able to use new media to mobilize a response. So that was extremely important, and we thank our partners, Open Media and Friends of Canadian Broadcasting, for their assistance in that stage. It's also been really important to identify other groups that can help. And to anticipate the attacks that you're going to get on your position. So for example, we knew that if we went to the CRTC and said, look, which we did, these channels should be in community hands, they should be owned by communities, that an obvious place we were open, because we only have 7 of these channels on the ground in all the country right now that are broadcasting and are owned by communities, is that they would say, well, what credibility do you guys have to run these channels? We had actually had a question at a previous hearing saying, what makes you think you guys, you community people, can do as good a job as the cable companies? So we contacted the Independent Media Arts Alliance, who run film and video co-ops. Their members are film and video co-ops across country, because we knew that they were already on the ground training, renting equipment to people, everything but distribution. And we said, are your members interested in this? So, and then we got them to intervene at the hearings, because many of them did want to reach broader audiences. So they were there at the hearings to say, we're already doing this work. We can do it tomorrow if you just write the policy that would give us some of this money that the cable companies had. So having partners that can help you and whose mandates overlap has been extremely important. Next, we've tried to take advantage of other conditions outside our own little issue that help us. So for example, there's been a huge amount of media around the lack of local programming in Canada. So closures of stations in the public and private sector put us in the perfect position to say, hey, the volunteer model has always been able to produce 10 times as much programming as the public and private sectors. If you let volunteers back in the game, communities want to do it, they could produce at least some of this local programming. We could fill the gap. The other issue we've all been talking about, Canada doesn't have a digital strategy. Our proposal says we want to open up not just channels, but multimedia training and access centers where Canadians all across the country could get new media digital training. So we tried to leverage other issues that are out being talked about so we can fit ourselves in the way that things appear to be going.